I'm going to show you 8 techniques that you can easily apply to your essay writing, which will boost your grade. If you get them all, you will be able to get grades 8 and 9. I've chosen the easiest GCSE text that students study, which is A Christmas Carol. Even if you don't know the text, you know the story, and you'll be able to follow these tips precisely in your own writing. Let's check them out. It is a grade 9 essay from a student called Jimmy. Thank you, Jimmy, for giving us it. Skill number 1 is to start with a 3-part thesis statement. To find out what that means, let's read Jimmy's thesis statement. In A Christmas Carol, Dickens presents the cruelty that Scrooge expresses to the poor. That is the first part. The cruelty that society enforces on the lower caste children. That's the second part. And the consequences of mistreating the lower classes. This isn't a perfect thesis statement, even though it does have 3 parts, because it doesn't explain why Dickens does this. The next part of the thesis statement does that. He wants to criticise selfish employers due to their greed and inhuman treatment of the poor, to advocate for a more philanthropic society, and to teach the reader of the significant consequences of his mistreatment. Now you can see he's starting to give us 3 reasons for Dickens, the author's particular choices, and that's always at the top of the mark scheme because it links to interpretations. So you can see this thesis statement is effectively an essay plan. Tip 2, plan your thesis statement in advance of the exam because you know you will be able to adapt it whatever the question. Why? Because the author's reasons for writing the novel don't change depending on what the question is, do they? They are the same no matter what. A further advantage of this is that he automatically writes about society of the time, and therefore he's bringing in context. So the examiner already has said, yep, I reckon this is at least level 4 for context AO3 because it shows understanding. Tip 2 might feel a little bit weird. It is not to start with the extract. I know the question says starting with the extract, but the mark scheme doesn't. In A Christmas Carol, Dickens presents the cruelty that Scrooge expresses towards the poor as unfair and inhumane in stave 1, when Bob Cratchit is described to be in a dismal little cell. This imagery implies an unpleasant, confined space, suggesting that Scrooge is almost imprisoning his employee. Now, what's Jimmy done here? He said, I know the question is likely to be about the Cratchits, or the ghosts, or Scrooge. For 2 out of 3 of those, this quotation will be relevant. It's only 3 words long, I reckon I can remember that, and I'm going to use it no matter what. It also comes from stave 1. So Jimmy has said to himself, hey, if I don't have to start with the extract, I will always be able to put stave 1 first because I'm just going to follow the novel through. I'm going to write each of the 5 chapters or staves in chronological order. So that is already an essay plan. So he sat back and said to himself, right, what is the first significant example of Scrooge's cruelty towards the poor? I know what it is, he says. It's this bit, when he's stuck in his cell, like a prisoner. Now, a further advantage of this is that this forces him to write a logical argument, seeing how the theme, here cruelty, or the character, here Scrooge, develops throughout the novel or in other texts. You can see how this is easy to do once you follow a chronological approach, and it gives your argument logic. So not starting with the extract makes it almost impossible for you not to get grade 7. The next technique is to think about how you can use subject terminology to write about the author's methods. Let's read this next paragraph so I can explain as we go. This mistreatment by Scrooge towards Bob Cratchit is further emphasised when Scrooge believes that the poor had better die. Now, further emphasised is subject terminology. In other words, it is vocabulary that you would use in any literature essay. That's what subject terminology means here. It's not just about spotting techniques like metaphor and simile and alliteration. The Juxtaposition of positivity and death emphasises how Scrooge and other employers at the time did not care about their employees or any other working class individuals. So juxtaposition here is a method. Again, it's something that writers do in every text that you study. So it's subject terminology. Notice how phrases like this, employers at the time, automatically brings context into your interpretation. Through the use of language and structure, Dickens may be criticising the mistreatment of the poor that employers express and may also be challenging the Malthusian theory. Perhaps Dickens believed that this corrupt way of thinking was actually the cause of the mistreatment of the poor so as not to increase the surplus population. The next technique, which is easy for you to adopt, is using this language that is conditional. It has an element of doubt in it. You'll see it in italics that aren't bold. May, perhaps. You could use might, could. All these words suggest that you are being exploratory. And where is exploratory in the mark scheme? It's in level 5 again, so it automatically pushes you up to grade 7. The next technique is how to write about context as an embedded quotation. So if you've studied the novel, you'll know about Malthusian theory, and just slipping it in here as part of the sentence to show an interpretation about the corrupt way of thinking of society and Dickens' readers is an easy way to use it, just dropped in like an embedded quotation. Let's see what happens in the next part of the paragraph. Moreover, through writing A Christmas Carol as a novella, Dickens may be trying to convey this message to the reader, who was probably an upper-class employer. Again, a bit of context. He could have expanded on this with the price of the novel, which was 5 shillings, which remember is a third of the salary that Bob gets at 15 shillings. So it's aimed at people who can afford the book. Bob would never do that. It's a third of his weekly wages. It's therefore aimed at upper class employers. Why? Because Dickens wants to change their attitude as an employer. As Jimmy puts it, in order for their viewpoints to change and for better treatment towards the poor being achieved. So you can see how that bit of context leads to Dickens' purpose, and the context isn't there in a big chunk. It's there as part of the point he's making. We've had lots of instances of context used this way, and so now it is at least developed level 5 for AO3 context. Let's look now at AO2. For that you need references to the text and quotations. So far Jimmy has dealt with only 2 of them. So yes, it's pretty detailed, but it doesn't have a range. So it's not going to get massive marks for AO2 yet. The detail and the subject terminology used to analyse them gives us level 4 because it is clear and it is explained. So this brings us to the next technique. How do I get loads of quotes into my essay? Well, Jimmy tactically does that now. Tactically, he's analysed some quotations in depth. Now he's going to embed quite a few more quotations in this big paragraph. In Stave 4, Dickens presents society's cruelty towards lower class children when the menacing ignorance and want are described to be man's. The placement of the frightening description of ignorance and want near man perhaps could be used to suggest that man is wolfish and menacing. However, Dickens could be implying that man is the cause of the suffering of ignorance and want. Through this use of structure, perhaps Dickens is trying to advocate for a fairer society and may also be criticising the child labour that was common during the 19th century. So, before we even focus on those quotations, but let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them here already, all embedded, all one word, although they can be a bit longer, as you'll see down here. Jimmy is also weaving in context. And this brings me to the next tip. If you always write about society, you will always be embedding your ideas about context. In other words, your ideas about context will link to an interpretation of the author's viewpoint, which will make it at least thoughtful and developed grade 7. So just remembering to use the word society as often as you can, without being stupid about it of course, will lift your mark up into the top grades. The fact that Scrooge is supporting the suffering of the poor emphasises how Victorian society, there it is again, causes children and other poor individuals to suffer. Through being an influential writer at the time, perhaps Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in the novella form as a message to not only the reader, but to society, especially the church and government, to persuade them to rethink how they exploit children is perfect because it can fit into any essay no matter what the topic. Which brings me to the next technique. There are some incidents in the novel where it is worth memorising what you want to say about them. So ignorance and want appear at the end of chapter 3, stave 3, and they're not really relevant to the plot. In other words, if Scrooge never noticed these strange little ghost-like creatures hiding beneath the cloak of Christmas Present, it wouldn't change the plot of the story at all. And so, Jimmy and you know that their creation is symbolic and they're there to deliver Dickens' message. Because Dickens' message is always going to get you grade 7 or above, it's worth planning in advance what you're going to say about Dickens' message, and you could memorise it word for word if you wanted to. Obviously, don't memorise Jimmy's word for word, you're going to have to put your own spin on it, but you know you'll be able to put this paragraph into most essays. For example, if the essay is about fear, well, this is something that Scrooge is afraid of, and Dickens wants us to fear the revolutionary consequences of having generations who are not giving enough education to support themselves with better jobs and who are kept poor and therefore would turn to violence to get more, such as in the French Revolution, which, by the way, featured in Dickens' previous book, A Tale of Two Cities. So all Dickens readers know that he's referring to the French Revolution and the possibility that that revolution could come across the channel if we exploit the poor in this way. If the question was about ghosts, well, ignorance and want are being sheltered in the robes of the Ghost of Christmas Present, and they too are ghosts. So it would fit that essay as well. It will fit every single essay that comes up. In the next paragraph, we'll see how Jimmy has memorised another section which he knows he's going to be able to write about. As a result, Dickens presents the consequences that cruelty to the poor has in stave 3, when the Ghost of Christmas Present explains to Scrooge that he foresees a crutch without an owner in a poor chimney corner. So Jimmy has memorised these two quotations because they are very close rhymes, owner and corner. The reader can instantly infer that Tiny Tim will die, which the ghost confirms. However, the half rhyme of corner and owner suggests that this prophecy is not set in stone yet, but society has the chance to change its ways in order to avoid the terrible fate that awaits the poor. So this is a genius idea I've never thought of. Jimmy is suggesting that if corner fully rhymed, so if the core rhymed with O, so if this said orner, that would be a full rhyme, 2 syllables rhyming, and that would suggest that this fate is set in stone. But by only having a half rhyme at the end of each word, he's saying, look, it's not set in stone yet, the future can change. Perhaps Dickens uses structure here to teach the reader and society of the significant impacts that their cruelty has on the poor, but also perhaps assure the reader that not all hope is lost and that there is still time to change. Now, AO1 asks us to have enough references to the text. Well, obviously, quotations covers that, but it also asks for references to the full task. And for me, the full task can never be met unless you dealt with the ending of your text. Now, Jimmy is going to kind of fudge this, and for that reason, I'm not going to give the essay 30 out of 30. So let's look at his penultimate paragraph and conclusion to see how he could have changed that to meet the full task. Dickens may be suggesting that to change, society must not only understand their own business, but to also care about other people's. Notice the brilliant embedding of quotations here and the reference to society again. As an allegoric novella, Dickens may be using A Christmas Carol as a way to inform the covetous old sinners that their cruelty does actually have a catastrophic impact on the poor. Notice this is a really cunning way to use the quotation about Scrooge to describe his readers, and also notice that this is a banker. This is the kind of quotation that you know is going to be relevant in every single essay. The two quotations up here are also going to be relevant to every single essay, and Jimmy has probably remembered them. Having said that, they will appear in the extract. And then the conclusion. In conclusion, Dickens presents the cruelty that the rich express towards the poor as inhumane and having severe consequences. However, Dickens suggests that it is not too late to save the poor from suffering and cruelty by achieving a more philanthropic society. Notice he's gone back to the ideas in his thesis statement and showing how he's already proved that his thesis statement was a logical argument. Moreover, through presenting no cruelty in Stave 5, Dickens may be emphasising that redemption and philanthropy achieve a more positive society where the rich care and look after the poor. So this is a kind of clever way to deal with the whole of Stave 5. He's saying, look, the most important thing about the ending of the novel is that the rich look after the poor, done and dusted, I'm leaving it at that. This is a massive lost opportunity. There is so much in the final few lines of the novel that Jimmy could have exploited here. Now, let's consider why such a brilliant student as Jimmy hasn't. Well, the obvious answer is that he doesn't have the writing stamina. He's written 714 words, which is, well, it's really incredibly short for a grade 9 essay, so full respect to Jimmy. But in my experience, students need at least 900 words to get the grade 9. You're not all as fluent as Jimmy, are you? And hey, that doesn't matter as long as you pack the word count in, because the more words you write, the more points you can make, the more evidence you can bring, the more interpretations you can have, you get the idea. However, in order to show that you have written the full task for AO1, it's easy just to write about the ending. The other advantage in that is the ending always gives the author's point of view. So for example here, the point of view is that the novel is also about fatherhood and it's also about the role of the employer, neither of which Jimmy has considered and would be easy for you to add in to nail on your very top grade. Now, it is definitely worthwhile going back to the extract and seeing what quotations Jimmy has been able to weave in. So at one point in the essay, he quoted this idea of the establishments that are being supported. At a quite different point in the essay, he talks about the poor rather dying than going to the workhouse. He also used this quotation about decreasing the surplus population. That again is a banker that you know will come up whatever the essay. At a separate point, he wrote about the reader using this quotation, a man understanding his own business and not interfering with anyone else's. Now that was only possible because of the genius of the approach of not writing about the extract first. If you want the whole essay with all my examiners' comments, paid subscribers get one of those every single week all the way up till the exams. The links to both the free and the paid version are in the description below. If you are studying A Christmas Carol, the video you want to watch next is this one coming up, telling you all the grade 9 ideas which will come up and be relevant to every single question. Check it out.